Welcome to Camera Ready and Able, the podcast that explores the intersection of media change and personal growth. I'm your host, Barbara Barna-Abel, and my calling is to help you tap into your superpowers to thrive on camera and in life, and to make an impact on the world. This episode is brought to you by the phrase, laughter on call. So I want to focus on the on-call part right now, because on-call means to be able to be contacted in order to provide a service, which is fabulous because that's what my guest for this episode does. Dani Klein is a comedian, actor, and author of the book, Take My Spouse, Please, as well as the founder and CEO of Laughter on Call, a company that runs interactive workshops and trainings rooted in mental wellness designed to foster connection through shared laughter. Laughter on Call combines compassion with comedy to boost morale, relieve stress, and improve communication. I love all of this so much. So welcome, Dani. I'm thrilled that we're getting to have this conversation.
I know. Thank you. Thank you. That was a fabulous intro. I love it.
So there's so much I want to ask you, and we'll get all into background. But one of the things I kind of want to find out, because of the work that you're doing and the impact, is what is universally funny?
Oh, universally funny is the tragic flaw of being a human. Like whatever, like your human imperfection is, like people really relate to that. Your willingness to be truthful about your flaw gives people permission to be truthful about theirs. And it's so disarming in a world where you're not really supposed to ever, you're supposed to be fine and have a Facebook scroll that looks beautiful and everything's beautiful. If you have the courage to say something that is vulnerable about yourself, that usually gets a laugh.
So I'm also thinking about film and even going back to silent films and the way goofiness, a lot of physicality is funny.
Well, right. But it's tripping, right? Like literally physically somebody tripping, like slipping on a banana peel. That's like the oldest gag, right?
Right.
And it makes you laugh because you're kind of glad it's not you. And like, but like it's being the element of surprise. Because right, that's a big comedy tool. So it's like he's not expecting it, and then he falls, and so yeah, physical comedy for
Just
sure.
as we're talking, I'm also thinking, because as a media coach, I work a lot around like body language and facial expressions, and facial animation is such a tool to be funny. Where in nonverbal communication, just really great, eyebrows, for instance, which makes me think of Brett Goldstein in Ted Lasso. I mean, his eyebrows are comedy gold, right?
Yeah.
And also you think about like, even, I guess it's kind of useful, making dumb faces in family photos, doing the rabbit ears, like there's universal silliness.
Well, and it's interesting what you're talking about, the being of the person. So I taught stand-up at UCLA for 10 years in the adult division. And the first exercise that I would do with people, and I probably will do this next week at Harvard, like I like people to come on without talking at all. And then the audience yells out adjectives about what they get from the person before they even open their mouth. And, I always say, it can't be anything mean, but I think it's really important as a person and a persona, for stand-up, it was about your persona. What do you walk in the room with? But for anything, what do you walk in the room with? Like, what's the vibe and energy that you're giving off before you even speak? And so that's like really helpful information. So we always start with that.
That's enormously helpful information. We're going to circle back to the Harvard. So just a tease to everyone listening is that Dani's company, Laughter on Call, is a Harvard case study now, which I just #goals. I just want to hear all about that, but we're going to come back to that. So I want to start with, because your background, since you are a comedian and an actor, and I forgot to mention in your bio that yes, also officially, I guess that makes you a professor of comedy.
Oh, God.
Oh, I love that though. So when did you find that you were funny and that comedy was important in your life?
I don't know if my family thought I was funny, but when we moved from New York City to Connecticut in the late 70s, and my mother was very depressed. People were very depressed. It was very dark in the house, and I had these clay puppets that I made. And so finger puppets, little finger things. And I used to do little, like to break the silence at the table, I would do like, I'm really not feeling good. I know. I wish dad would, like little. And I was like 12, 11. And so I think that that's always been my response to tension, is to try to get people to laugh. Like it is. And there are those of us who are just, that's how we process life. We just would feel better if people would laugh, and we'll actually do anything to make that happen. And so I think that was that's the earliest kind of sign that this is probably something that I want to communicate with myself. But then I was a waitress for many years after college, and people would say to me, I don't understand why you're waiting tables. Like, you should be a comedian. I don't know what you're doing. Like, why are you waiting tables? And so and then I took this class at UCLA, the class I just mentioned, I took. And the teacher said to me after the first class, you're a comedian, whether you do this for your life or not, because it's a really hard life, but you should just know that that's your lens and that's your gift. And then I went back to teach that class 10 years later. And of course, I knew what she meant immediately. You just meet those of us that are a little bit seeing the world a little bit off and have the courage to say things that other people maybe wouldn't say. Like, it's the whole thing.
Wait, I don't want to put you on the spot, but so now are we tapping into like a checklist for comedians? You must have, not in a bad way, but I meant like, what else do you need to have?
Well, you definitely
be a little bit off. You have to be willing to say stuff. Courage. Okay.
Courage and a unique point of view, and more courage. Because not only do you need the courage to stand before an audience, but you need the courage to assert your point of view and the courage to keep going. And I will say, in this last 4 years since I've been doing the entrepreneur trip, turns out everything takes courage. Newsflash.
I was just about to say the same thing as you were describing. So one of my questions, because I was, again, data and metrics, so impressed that 20,000 people have been through the Laughter on Call program, however you describe it, since 2018. That's amazing. So bravo. And like, again, making the world a better place. Have themes emerged that you've started to see about human behavior and human response to these things out of, the data from 20,000 people, like pinpointing to like, this will always get a laugh, or actually just to see these moments of when transition happens or openness happens?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So just to be clear, like, we do interactive. So we do interactive workshops. That's why the numbers are so big, because we do international, right? Like, we'll have a team from India on the call with a team from Italy and Israel, and then someone from Wisconsin, because apparently every company has someone in Wisconsin. But it's fully engaging. And that's why, so it's not culturally specific. The comedy's created in the room so that anybody can play. And it's also no edge. Like, we're totally laughing with, not laughing at. And so it's funny you should ask that, because we do this yes and game. So do you know the yes and world?
Yes, but share it for anyone listening who may not.
Okay, so yes and is an improv tool. It's not a stand-up tool, it's an improv tool. And it literally is saying yes and, as opposed to yeah, maybe, or yeah, but, which when you're trying to innovate and create, the yeah buts and the yeah maybes really shut that conversation down. They're kind of soft nose, essentially. And so we teach people to say yes and I'm not, this is not my own genius, right? This is like 100 years of improv. And so what we will do in one of our big events is we want people to say yes and, literally get it in their mouths. So we'll create a spa, like the ultimate spa for your company. Yes and one person at a time. And what's so funny is every country will say, and a room of puppies. Like, everybody's, I don't know why, it never fails. Everyone wants a room of puppies in their spa. And then it always gets a big laugh. So that's just one. That's not exactly a societal trend, but that is something that I've observed. I think what most consistently gets laughs is authenticity. Is somebody, again, having the courage to just say what they're thinking in the moment, and it's unexpected, and that's what makes everybody laugh. And it's also, interestingly, what opens the door for other people contributing authentically. So when you ask, like, what's the moment? That's usually the moment. When somebody's willing to be authentic at the top, it really opens it up for everybody. Like, you set the tone of like, this is going to be a safe space where you can share some vulnerability.
I think that's a hallmark of leadership, whether that person's in a position of leadership at that company. To me, that's a leader.
Right. And having the, here's the thing, like, I don't really promote self-deprecation that much, especially for women. I think we got that covered. I don't think
amen, sis. I bring that up. A lot in the work that I do.
Right. But you can use it as a tool if it's not the thing that you're being hired to do. Right. So I can come on and say, yeah, my family, we had dinner last night. I don't really cook. I basically defrost. I'm a defrost. Right. And so, but
I assemble, just in case you want to know.
Assemble. That's a very good tool. But like, I'm not going to get on and go, well, I'm not really that funny. I hope this workshop works out. Like, you can't, you have to have a certain level of authority about what people are depending on you to deliver. But that doesn't mean that you are impenetrable. Like, you could make a joke about not getting out of the subway in time, about your timing, or, there's always something human that you can contribute as a leader that gives people permission to feel like it's okay not to be perfect. And that is so important if you're interested in innovation, because if people feel like they have to be perfect, they're not going to bring their ideas forward. And so you're going to shut that down.
Wow. Okay. So it's just popping into my head. What you're creating is a space for psychological safety.
Yes, which is really funny given that we're a comedy company, because the perception of comedy, of course, is like edgy and hip. And I will tell you, this is the debut of our logo. So I used to have a microphone in the logo, like a stand-up mic was running through the logo. And we just took it out. And it's because it was sending a wrong message. Like, we're not stand-ups. We're not going to roast your boss. Or like, we are about what's called affiliative humor, which is bringing people together, creating connection. So you wouldn't anticipate that creating a psychologically safe space is what a group of comedy people would do, but that's 100% our goal always.
So now I think I want to introduce the idea of like how the genesis story for Laughter on Call, because it's very, very moving. And so how this begins with the story of your mom and her Alzheimer's.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's maybe like 8 years ago, and she was living in New York City, and I was living in Los Angeles. And you mentioned my book, so I wrote this book called Take My Spouse, Please, which is about using the tools of comedy actually to have more laughter in your long-term relationship. And I was on a book tour, like a 15-city book tour. And I got a call from one of my mother's friends saying, your mother is arguing with waiters and she can't fill out a deposit slip. And the waiter part was like, whatever, that she was a tough lady. She was a New Yorker. But the not filling out a deposit slip, that was like that was one of the few joys of her life. So I was like, that's not good. And so we flew to New York. My sister lives in Boston. She came in, I came in, and what we found was, a woman who needed help. Like, it was chaos. And anyway, to quicken that end of it, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. We hired a team of people. She fired a team of people very quickly, but we got people in place, and that lasted about maybe 2 years. At a certain point, though, she wasn't leaving the apartment, and I was like, come on, like, this is silly. So I brought her to LA, and very quickly she became depressed. Like, initially it was a place with a big chandelier, so it would look like an Upper East Side building, but quickly she figured out she wasn't leaving, and she became depressed. And I felt terrible about it. I was very worried, and I was at my dentist, and because it's LA, she's like also like a life coach. And I was like, seriously, I love this woman. And so, but I was like crying, and I was like, I just wish I could hire a comedian to cheer her up, because I can't do it. She sees a daughter, but maybe a comedian could do it. And she was like, oh, well, you should do that. You should definitely do that. So I put up on Facebook looking for comedian interested in gerontology, paid gig. And my phone rang 5 minutes later. It was my friend in New York who's a comedian. And she was like, oh my God, I have someone in LA who wants to work with seniors. She's sitting on park benches. You should call her. So I call this woman. She comes over and she does exactly like what we knew to be true and now know to be true and train, which is she got at eye level with my mother, and she took her in fully, and she was authentic, and she told the truth. And she was like, I know. You don't want to talk to me. No, you're probably thinking, who is this schmuck just talking to me? And my mother heard the word schmuck and like, she started laughing and she was like, schmuck. And then the comedian talked to her, she was like, schmuck. And they did this like schmuck off. And then she handed her a glass of water. And my mother took the water. And I was like, oh, okay, so you're hired. And so I hired her 8 hours a week and she made her own schedule. It was, and it changed my mother's life. Like it just did. She started laughing and joining with her community, even when the comedian wasn't there. And I was like, okay, so this has to be everywhere. Like, it was just one of those moments where I was like, well, I didn't mean to do this, but like, how could I not do this? Like, there's always comedians that need some support. And there is an exponential population that's facing Alzheimer's. So that's how it launched. And then I wrote an article about it for AARP magazine about the experience. And I got hundreds of responses from around the world. Please bring me a comedian. Can I have a comedian in Pittsburgh, in London, in Florida? And I was like, okay, I guess I'm in. And coincidentally, Time magazine had a dedicated issue called The Science of Laughter that came out. It was a whole magazine about like the science and the studies and the physical and emotional benefits of laughter. So I had that and I had my article, and I happened to know a woman who had a foundation whose mother had Alzheimer's. And she was like, I think you should come talk to me and my people because I want to support this. And that's how it all started.
And this was 2018?
Yeah.
Wow. So then extraordinary luck in some ways, but I was going to say timing, because it's good and bad with the pandemic. But I mean, we're already in a world with chronic loneliness. Right. I know that funny helped me tremendously through the pandemic. So could you just walk us through a little bit about how then the growth and you're adapting to a virtual world?
Right. So I had come up with a training for healthcare staffs in communities. And everything was in person, though. And then, of course, March 13th, we're shut down. We can't get to anybody because the senior community was the most vulnerable. So basically, I was told, you're going to have to shut your doors. Like, I had a CFO and he was like, well, I don't know what you think you're going to do because you're done. And it was a very teary staff meeting. and then I was just like, well, wait a minute. We have a camera in the office because we were training comedians all over the world. We have a camera. Let's just live stream. Let's see what happens. Like, we'll set up some interactive comic relief for people Monday through Friday. We'll call it Lunchtime Laughter, open to the public for half an hour. So we started, and very quickly, we thought it was going to be seniors and their caregivers. And then very quickly, it was just perfectly lucid people who were just depressed and lonely and scared and wanted comic relief. And we needed comic relief. Like, that's the other thing. I always felt like the hair club, that dude on the hair club for men.
Cy Sperling, in case you needed to know.
Yes. So I was the Cy Sperling of laughter because I was like, wait a minute, I need this. I'm not just like doing it. I need it. It was wonderful. And from there, I was reading all these articles in Harvard Business Review and Forbes and The Atlantic and the Washington Post about the challenges of the mental health challenges during this time, and for HR specifically. Mm-hmm. So then I came up with programming and we pitched it, and we had, it just really took off, and we've been developing all kinds of things since. But that's how that adaptation, because it was about isolation. Right? It just became a global problem as opposed to the function of a cognitive decline. It became like, wait, we're all isolated, and we knew what to do. We knew that we could help. So that's how that happened.
Wait, if I can point something out in your amazing creative problem solving which is, I think, one of your superpowers, because it also taps into the kind of improv aspect of this, and then maybe just how you're a default setting, because you had a yes and, well, we have to shut down, yes and, but what if? But what if is such a powerful question. So, by the way, so now that you said that, the relationship and what you saw with your mom is your first case study. So I don't know, and if you even have an answer to this, but the relationship between comedy and laughter and continuing to laugh and its impact on minimizing or slowing cognitive decline.
Okay, so it does not slow cognitive decline. I think it's hard. No, I think it's hard. It would be hard. to
asking for a friend. Now I'm really just asking for myself.
No, but definitely engagement 100% helps.
That's right.
And not being
well
depressed.
documented. Yeah.
Yes, that it's about engagement. And that's the other thing, is that I couldn't call the company Cognitive Engagement on Call. Like nobody's calling that company. But so the laughter really is just the way in. And that's true for our corporate work now and our healthcare workers. It's just the way in to get people to connect. And that I do believe helps the progression of a cognitive decline, is keeping someone engaged in that way and feeling seen and heard. And also for caregivers, for self-care, for the laughter and the benefits of endorphins and dopamine that laughter brings caregivers is very, very important. But I don't like to say, I don't want to say, oh, we heal things, because I feel like that makes me worried to say that.
Ooh, why does it make you worried? Aside for liability.
Yeah, because I don't want to be like not to equate laughter with snake oil, but I don't want to be like salesy like that. And I also think it is such a different, particularly Alzheimer's I'm talking about. And I've been through the cancer thing too, but the Alzheimer's is so exhausting and so upsetting for loved ones of people who are facing it. And so I don't want to oversell, or I don't know, I don't want to pretend that I can cure anything. All we can do is create human connection and allow people to be present with what is. And that's a big part of it. Is I would see people visiting their loved ones and they'd be like, Mom, how are you? Are you good? You're good, Mom? You look good. Everything's good. Isn't it nice here? It's great. It's like, no. Like, that's not helpful. That's not the truth. Like, if you can be present with what is, you actually can still have a connection with someone as they're losing their mind. But you have to be in the moment, and you have to have the courage to see what's really there. And that is a comedy tool, seeing what's really there and having the courage to reflect it back.
Is that a little bit about tone? Because I love the example you already gave when, your first comedy caregiver gets down with your mom and says, who am I? But it wasn't angry. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't negative or down. Seems like it was pretty fact-based.
Well, right. So it's empathy.
It's
about empathy. So that was the truth. She was identifying what my mother might have been experiencing. She was being empathic. And that's another hallmark of what we do, is we bring compassion and empathy. And we don't try to pretend it's not tough. We did events all through COVID, right? So, where people were, I'd like to laugh today, but I lost my brother-in-law this morning. So then you have to
those
say, situations
we feel guilty about laughing.
Right.
Or the notion, right? Isn't there's also that line, wait, too early?
Right.
Too soon?
Right, too soon. But if they showed up, in our case, if they had that experience and showed up, they wanted in some way to connect. And so you ease them in and make them feel seen and heard and welcome, and not like, oh, really, you're grieving? Well, you need to go over there. You need to leave this room. Kind of, it's a lot about.
Oh, Dani, the permission to just be.
Right.
Oh, that's a beautiful thing. I want to switch gears. Well, one, I want to ask about the Harvard case study, because I just want to know how that works. And it's just, do they call you up and hire in? But also want to ask you, just had a kind of a lightning round question that popped in my head was, looking around the world, who would be dream, not because they're easy, but I can come up with a list off the top of my head of people who need your services. Let's say US Congress.
Somebody just pitched me that. Somebody just said to me, you need to reach out to Adam Schiff and all the LA people. And one of my friends is on the council, an LA councilman. I have talked to him. I wish that I could be that specific. I actually feel like everyone could benefit. That's the thing. Like, there isn't an isolated group like, well, they really need it. I think it's whether or not they're open to it. And people do ask me, and I mean this with all due respect, but lawyers are the hardest to do what we do, like to engage in what we do as a group. That's what we have found, is that lawyers are very challenging because they're paid to be the smartest one in the room. That's their job. And so if you're asking them to lower that, it's oftentimes just too big a risk, and they don't really see the payoff. And, so those have been some of our more challenging gigs.
So I'm so obviously obsessed with your Harvard case study. So how does that work?
So that came out of the article, and then we had a write-up in the Washington Post, and then during COVID, Laughter on Call was featured in the New York Times as a business that made the pivot. And one of the professors at Harvard has a class, Allison Woodbrook, she has a class called Talk Gooder. And she had also written about laughter in business and the value of having a sense of humor. And I probably, knowing me, reached out to her on LinkedIn and said, hey, I love your article. I just think you might like my company. And then she got in touch with me, and then we had a couple of Zoom calls, and she's like amazing. One of these probably 35, 3 kids in a rock band and a Harvard professor. Like, you're just like, okay, you win. But also amazingly warm and charming, like truly amazing person. And she, I guess, took the Laughter on Call model to her team of people and pitched it. And, it's a pretty cool story. And I think particularly because at that point, we were very much in the senior space. And the thing is, everybody is talking about the senior. Right before COVID, the senior population and what's coming for boomers is it's like we're standing at this huge tidal wave that's coming, and like, how are we girding ourselves for it? So I think it was a really compelling case because it was taking what's going to be just an overwhelming problem and coming in on the from the side on it. And also a challenge for students financially, like, okay, yes, and this is something that's needed, and how do we make it profitable? And now going back, so we had one meeting, and now I'm going back in 2 weeks because the business has shifted and grown. And so, okay, let's talk about, now that we have corporate support, what else is possible? Like, now we're getting into benefits for employees. Like, how can a company that wants to support the 62% of employees who define themselves as lonely, what can a company do for them? Well, you can give them 3 Laughter on Call sessions as part of their benefit plan. And then they can have that for their household. So if they're caring for someone with Alzheimer's, or they have a kid that's depressed, or they're depressed, they can set up a one-on-one with a Laughter on Call person, and we'll bring comic relief and bring some levity to your household. And that's something that an employer, a progressive employer, could get behind. So there's lots of other ways now to take what we do and have it make a difference.
Can individuals work with you?
Yeah, we have lots of one-on-ones.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that just through, I'll make sure that's in the episode notes, but that's through the Laughter on Call website.
Yeah. We do it, and we didn't know that Zoom was going to work, but we had a number of clients during the pandemic that worked one-on-one. It was really, they created a relationship.
The one other thing I want to ask is, because now you became the accidental entrepreneur.
Yes.
And which many of us do. And it's not easy. And I'm obsessed with this book called The Messy Middle by Scott Belsky, because the messy middle is the hardest part of any venture. So I highly recommend, side note, for anyone to read. So I just want to ask, so how does your own, like the Laughter on Call, like, in this, going back to the Cy Sperling, how is this helping you now in the, stresses and stuff that comes up when you're an entrepreneur?
Well, I have a wonderful team, and I tend toward the impatience and one could say a bit negative interpretation of what's possible, and they do not. And so I'll say, if we have a pitch and I don't hear from them in 2 days, I'm like, well, I mean, obviously that's dead. And they'll be like, no, Dani, no, calm down. It's okay. So I'm fortunate that I have a wonderful team.
So you're savvy to surround yourself with people who support you in the mission. That's important. You created a culture.
Yes. Very hard to do virtual office. That's another thing. Like, all my clients, I understand what they're going through. Like, I have the same problem, but nobody wants to come to an office. But I do think it's important to mention for anybody in this position that I had a very difficult CFO that I had to fire. And it took me like a year and a half to finally say, I'm out. I can't do this. He was abusive. And it was all so new to me, the financial piece and spreadsheets and all that I was just turned it over. And ultimately that was not good. That was not good. I mean, I learned what I had to learn, but it's not acceptable to be talked down to. And
no, it's not acceptable. But it's remarkable what we put up with, especially when our list of priorities are 17 long. Just as a final note, you brought up a great question. So what have you learned just about yourself and business through this process that you didn't know?
Well, the biggest thing is that I didn't know I was capable of any of this. Like, this was just, I was a theater major. Okay. Like, this was not, I could have never envisioned. And the way that I've been able to do it, which is going to sound cliche, is like one day at a time. Okay. And I'm lucky because I'm pretty smart, as long as I don't have to look at a map or don't ask me about world history, but about like, okay, what's the next right action that has to happen? I will do it. So I learned that about myself, that I will do it. Even if I don't know it, I'll get the resources to figure it out. I'm not young, and it's not true that you become invisible in your 50s. And it is maybe for other people, but you're only as invisible as you allow yourself to be. And I just didn't even think about it. I think if you said, everything I read is that a woman, I think I started this at 54, 55 maybe. And that's kind of unheard of. And I'm very, very lucky. I know that I'm very, very lucky that first investor took a risk. I don't rest on laurels. And I think it's important, as you pointed out, to surround yourself with people who have hope and drive and belief in what you're doing, and can't settle for anything other than that. When you're an entrepreneur, you can't have any negativity. I'm sorry, you can't. It's too hard. So you can't have anybody on your team that's like, you can't have any yes but or yes maybe people on your team. You need yes and people on your team.
Oh, that's beautifully said. I am so grateful for this conversation. Thank you. And I want to thank you for listening to Camera Ready and Able. And if you want to get from where you are to where you're meant to be, please shoot me a note via my website, ableintermedia.com, and be sure to download my free ebook, 12 Tips for Success on Camera. And as always, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already.